Hello and welcome to my channel, In Search of Wonder. My name is Anne and today I want to talk about all of the books I read in November. This is the perfect mug for today because we have officially entered sweater weather here in Northern Virginia. A cold front has moved in and it is very, very cold. But it doesn't look like we're going to get any snow in the immediate future, which is unfortunate because as far as I'm concerned, the only reason for cold is snow. So if you're gonna make it cold, make it snow too, okay? Those are the rules, but unfortunately we break those rules all the time here. Anyway, it's cold outside, and as I am filming this, we are on the very last day of November. Tomorrow is the beginning of December and all things Christmas, but today I want to take a minute and to look back on all that I read in November. Okay, it's still November, I get that. And I still have one book that I'm working on, but I'm almost finished with it. So I'm going to count it for all my November reading. I'm going to look forward into the future at the end of this day, and I'm going to say that I'm going to have it finished by the end of November. So we're going to include this. It's David Brainerd's personal testimony, short little book. I'm 75% of the way through, and I will be able to finish this. So I am filming this today and not later, so that November is actually done, because I have time at this moment and no one is in the house. So we maximize our time for filming when we have it. How well did I do on my TBR and my plans for reading in November? That is the question I always like to take a minute to look back and assess. And it's always fun to see what goals I accomplished and what goals I did not accomplish, etc. First of all, let's talk about the S Lewis Readathon, which I co-hosted together with Morgan and Shannon. And it was a fantastic readathon. Had a lot of fun with that. So thankful that Morgan had the idea. Unfortunately, I did not quite fill up my bingo board. I didn't black it out. And I didn't double anything up, but I don't think that I could have doubled anything up that I read. So thankfully, though, I did get not one, but two bingos. You can't tell now because I haven't filled this in. That's where this is going to go. This is for Surprised by Joy, a Christian autobiography. This is from the journals of David Brainerd. So it's sort of his own. It's not, he didn't really write it as an autobiography, but that's essentially what happened. So I'm going to put that there, and then that will give me a bingo down and across on the bottom. So that means that I will have finished 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 out of 9 prompts. However, just gonna throw this in here, I am currently reading Across the Ages by Gabrielle Meyer, and I'm not going to finish it by the end of the day today, so it's not technically going to be done in November, but I'm still going to put it here on the Space Trilogy, a sci-fi prompt. That's what made me pick it up. That's why I chose to read it at this particular time. So then I will actually have read 7 out of the 9 prompts, which isn't too bad, considering that for 75% of the month of November, I was in a major reading slump. I was reading some pretty heavy, longish things, and I was low on time. Like, I had very little time for reading. And so I didn't get a lot of reading done the first 3 weeks. It all got reading in the week of Thanksgiving when I had downtime and free time and I was actually able to read. And so I am actually amazed that I got to 7 of these, because by the 3rd week in November, I was thinking, I'm failing. I'm co-hosting this readathon and I'm failing. So I'm thankful that in the end, we pulled it back up again. So what did I read for the C.S. Lewis Readathon? So first of all, I read the group read, a Christian nonfiction, which was Miracles by C.S. Lewis. And it was a very in-depth, very detailed, very intellectual, very philosophical, not entirely what I was expecting, more apologetic than I had thought that it would be. But it was also interesting, and I really appreciated all of C.S. Lewis's thoughts on a topic I had not thought much about before, which is miracles. And miracles particularly from the perspective of a skeptic and trying to understand God and nature and how the two do or do not work together, that sort of thing. It was very interesting. I'm so glad that I read it. And then for Till We Have Faces, a female main character, I read Hanging Mary by Susan Higginbotham, which is a historical fiction about the first woman who was, executed in the United States. And she was among the band of conspirators who was executed for their role in assassinating President Lincoln. And it was very well written. I'm looking forward to reading more books by Susan Higginbotham. That was the first I had read by her. She is a local to me author that I met earlier this year, and I will definitely be checking out her other books. And then for Screwtape Letters, an epistolary or spiritual warfare book, I read Lady Susan, which is by Jane Austen. It is a lesser known work by her. It was not published during her lifetime. It was actually not published until late in the 19th century, I think, or even early in the 20th century. It was the last of her books to be published. It was published by one of her relatives, her nephew, I think. And it's very unlike her other books, at least in the form that they were finally presented to the public when she did publish them. It's completely epistolary, so it works for Epistolary January. If you want to read that coming up, it's kind of short. It's only like 60 pages. It's really a short story, not even a novella, really. And it's just so funny, and it's so insightful. It's such an insightful look into human character and into the mind of a narcissistic sociopath. If you are interested in getting into the mind of someone like that, she does a brilliant job. It's brilliant, absolutely brilliant. I loved it so much and gave it 5 stars. So that fits for that prompt. And then The Discarded Image, a book that inspired Lewis. And because Morgan said I could, I put A Tangled Web in that spot, which is by Lucy Maud Montgomery. Now, did he read that particular book? Did it inspire him in any way? I don't know. We don't know exactly. We know some books that he said inspired him. This wasn't on any of those lists, but he could have read it. He could have read anything by Lucy Maud Montgomery and have been inspired by her. So we put it there. And then The Great Divorce, a stubborn character. So I put Bridge to Haven on there by Francine Rivers because that was pretty much the hallmark of the main character's character. She was incredibly stubborn, and that basically the whole plot was built around that fact, that aspect of her character. So then finally, Surprised by Joy, a Christian autobiography that I already mentioned. That's going to be the piece in that puzzle. And then Across the Ages by Gabrielle Meyer for sci-fi, which is time travel. So that's how it fits in there. So that was the C.S. Lewis Readathon. I am really curious to hear if you are participating in the C.S. Lewis Readathon. Please put in the comments below what you read and whether you enjoyed it or not, what you rated it. Did you get any bingos? Did you black out the board? How did you do on the C.S. Lewis Readathon? We want to know. And then the other one that I participated in was the Historathon, which is hosted this year by Gloria Z. Thompson and Lindsay's Little Library and Lena's Bookshelf. And I actually did black out this one, but only because I doubled up prompts like crazy. In the end, I read 4 books to go with this, and I fit them into all of the places on the board. So I was pretty happy about that. I already mentioned Hanging Mary, and that one fit for a famous historical figure and being the first woman executed in the United States. And then also a historical nonfiction hybrid because, for sure, oh my goodness, it was so well researched. And at the end, Susan Higginbotham, she included all of the information about her research and what she had learned and what was true and what was not in her story. It was very much drawn from actual facts and what we know to be true from court testimonies, from the trials, etc., all of that. Very real to life. So that was great. And then War and Conflict, because it was set during the end of the Civil War and the aftermath of the Civil War and the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. So definitely lots of war and conflict going on there in that time period. So that was Knocking Out 3, and I did read that one earlier in November and enjoyed it. Then we have The Murder of Mr. Wickham, and I fit that under historical mysteries, a murder mystery that was set in the late Regency era, and it is set with characters from Jane Austen's novels, and including some new ones, like the offspring of some of the couples in her novels. And I also put it in the strong sense of place spot on the board because it's a house party at Donwell Abbey, which is the home of Mr. and Mrs. Knightley, Emma. And it's like a house murder mystery, you know, where they're stuck in a manor and they can't escape until they figure out who killed the person. And so there's a strong sense of being in the Abbey and what it's like to live, you know, in an Abbey. They have chapel scenes there and everything. Anyway, it's really does have a strong sense of place. So now that was not a favorite book of mine, and I don't necessarily recommend it wholeheartedly, but parts of it were enjoyable. There were things about it that I did like, and so that goes there. And then Bridge to Haven by Francine Rivers. I put in historical era exploration because it is set in 1950s Hollywood, and I don't know that I've ever read a novel set in that time period. I'm sure I must have at some point read 1 or 2 books in that era, but it's not something that I feel like there's so much World War II historical fiction and like Civil War fiction and Victorian Regency fiction. But the 1950s era is largely unexplored in terms of fiction. I've noticed a lot more recent fiction about the Cold War era and that time period and McCarthyism and that kind of stuff, but I have not read much in that era, so I put it in that spot. And then historical romance, because there is part of this, it's not a romance novel, but there is a strong romance thread in it that's part of the story. And then the Scarlet Pimpernel. And I finally read that. So that was like a big goal accomplished this year. Whew, in November. Finally got to that. Anyway, so the Scarlet Pimpernel, I put in historical fiction adaptation. There are multiple adaptations of this. 2 of them that I have really loved. One is the 1982, I think, movie with Jane Seymour, which I loved. Watched it as a teenager multiple times. I really loved that movie. And then in 1999, there was a BBC TV series, which actually I just watched recently, so that wasn't one that I knew before reading the book again. But the other one that I wanted to mention was a musical, which I also have loved. I've never seen the musical live, but I love the soundtrack and have listened and have watched the full-length version on YouTube. So the movie and the musical were my first introduction to the Scarlet Pimpernel. And then I read the book, and now I reread the book. And I just loved the book so much. Such a great book. I am looking forward to reading more by that. But anyways, adaptations. Multiple adaptations abound for that book. So that fit that prompt very well. And then social issues and cultural perspectives. And the book deals not in a heavy-handed way and not in like a serious philosophical way too much. It touches on it some, but it is set during the French Revolution, and it does grapple with questions of aristocracy and the poor people and equality and liberty and fraternity, you know, those main themes of the French Revolution and how they played out in reality and what was good about it and what was bad about it. It is tackled in this book, but in a very lighthearted way. It's not a serious discussion, and it's very easily readable. So it doesn't hit you like a ton of bricks, and it's not like a heavy educational tome about these topics. It's really deftly handled in that sense. So I filled out the whole board for the Historathon. And then I started the bucket List-a-thon by Danny Dabbles, and I got through 6 rolls, and I'm saving the last 4 rolls for December so I can finish up some things that have been on my TBR this year or recently. So first of all, for the first roll, I went to TBR and I read The Road by Cormac McCarthy because that was on my TBR for November and has been on my shelf, my physical shelf, for a while, and I have been wanting to read it for a while. And then number 2 was, what was that? A favorite author. And so I read A Bridge to Haven by Francine Rivers together with Alma at Alma's Reading Journey. And we both enjoyed that one. Francine Rivers is definitely a favorite author of mine. Then number 3 was a buddy read, and I put A Tangled Web by Lucy Montgomery for that one because I did that as the group read for the Montgomery Challenge. And then number 4 was another TBR, and so I read The Scarlet Pimpernel, which I had put on my list for the year of books that I wanted to reread this year, and finally made it to that one. Number 5 was a comfort read, and so I read Lady Susan by Jane Austen because Jane Austen is always a comfort read for me, and that fit that spot perfectly. It also was something that I have been wanting to read. Another of my goals for this year was to finish my rereading of all Jane Austen, so knocking out goals here. And then number 6 was a friend recommendation, and I put If I'm Being Honest by C.P. Cabanniss because Courtney Reeds is the author of that book, and also she has recommended it, of course, many times, and it was set at Thanksgiving, so it was the perfect timing to read that one. So that's how I did on the various reading challenges that I was participating in the month of November. But now I want to take a step back and look at the big picture at what I read in November. And this is my November spread minus the little cover for David Brainerd's personal testimony, which is going to go right there. I read 9, 10, once I have that in there, 10 books, which is great. I didn't think it was going to get that far. That was fantastic. Really happy with that. I read Hanging Mary, historical fiction by Susan Higginbotham, and I gave it 4 stars. I read The Murder of Mr. Wickham by Claudia Gray, and I gave it 2.5 stars. Not a favorite. I read The Road by Cormac McCarthy, and I begrudgingly gave it 4 stars. In my heart, it's really more like a 2 or a 3 star, but there were also things about it that I was able to appreciate and admire. So I ended up with 4 stars, but that's kind of iffy. And then Miracles by C.S. Lewis, I gave it 3 stars, and it was just really heavy reading for me. Not that I did not enjoy it, I did, and it just wasn't quite what I expected. And it also, I'm not really the target audience of it, but it is, I think, a good book. There also are some things I would disagree with C.S. Lewis on, so I couldn't give it like a full 5 stars, but it was very good. And that was my one of 2 nonfiction this month. And then A Tangled Web by Lucy Montgomery, I gave it 3 stars. It was fun, it was enjoyable. It was definitely not my favorite by her. I did enjoy participating in the group read, and I am glad I read it, and it does accomplish goals for me, which I'll talk about in a minute. But now, A Bridge to Haven, I gave that 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. It has very similar themes to Redeeming Love. If you have read that by Francine Rivers and enjoyed it, you will probably like this book. And it's very well written. A little bit slow moving and a little bit too detail heavy for me. So that's why I didn't give it a full 5 stars. But I did really enjoy the story, and I was really rooting for the characters, and I loved her themes of redemption and forgiveness and surrender. Really beautifully done. And then the Scarlet Pimpernel, I gave it 5 stars because it was just a wonderfully enjoying read. I just read it beginning to end in less than 24 hours and had a fabulous time with it. Lady Susan, 5 stars. Again, I read it in a morning. It was a wonderful, fun read and so brilliant. I just admire Jane Austen all over the place. How can I give it anything but 5 stars? And then, if I'm being honest, by C.B. Cabanniss, I gave it 3.5 stars. I was surprised at the depth and the character development in the book. It was really good, and I enjoyed that. That was a great read for Thanksgiving week. And then this one, I will say more about it in my next weekly reading wrap-up when I've completely finished it, but I'm really enjoying the first couple of chapters I didn't love as much, but now I'm in the part where he has been preaching to some tribes of Native Americans, and the Holy Spirit is just really moving and convicting them of sin, and there's just a revival going through the Native American community I think he was in New Jersey at that point. So many of them converted and became Christians, and of their own accord, independently gave up various forms of idolatry and devil worship and that kind of stuff. And so it's been really interesting. This part is really engrossing. I always like to look at this real quick and say, okay, so I had my TBR, all my plans for reading. How much of that did I actually accomplish? And as often happens, what I actually read ended up looking significantly different from what I intended to read, but that's fine because that's life. The TBR is really just a guideline of sorts. I definitely don't hold to it rigidly. But for the Read Your Shelf Challenge by Chantel, I wanted to read a book, or I was supposed to read a book that intimidates me, and The Road by Cormac McCarthy definitely fit that bill, and I'm so glad that I finally read it because I didn't hate the reading of it, actually. It kept me reading, and I wanted to read more, and there were things that I enjoyed very much about it. So it wasn't an awful read, and it wasn't as intimidating as I thought it would be, by any means. So I'm glad that I read that. And then for the TN Ink Society Read the Classics Challenge, which is a year-long challenge I'm doing, I was supposed to read a friend recommendation, and so I read The Scarlet Pimpernel, which my sister recommended to me as being one of her favorite classics. And technically it was a reread for me, so I'm not sure, how that works with a friend recommendation, but I asked for recommendations of favorite classics, and that was one that she gave me. And it fit nicely with my other goals for the year, so I read it. I did read that one. For the S Lewis Readathon, I wanted to read After Alice for the middle grade fantasy, and I just didn't get to that. Although now after watching Wicked, I do want to read it, and I kind of want to read the book Wicked, but I feel like I would like the musical better. What do you think? If you've read the book, let me know. But it's the same author who wrote After Alice. Anyway, for Christian nonfiction, I was slated to read Miracles, and I did. Check. And for sci-fi, the next book in the Recorder series or the next book in the Timeless series. So I opted for the next book in the Timeless series, and I haven't finished it yet, but I will. So I will cross that off. And then with a female main character, I had wanted to read Remarkably Bright Creatures, but I just did not have the time for that one. So I actually put in that slot a different book that I had read, that I was already reading. And then for Epistolary and Spiritual Warfare, I had put Gilead on there as an option, but I did not get to that. So I put on there Lady Susan, which I actually had intended for a book that inspired Lewis. And I realized that it fit better in the epistolary slot. So I did a little switcheroos there. And then read a book by one of the other Inklings I didn't get to. I was going to read Dorothy Sayers, and I did not. And then a book that inspired Lewis, Lady Susan was in that spot, but then I switched her to epistolary and I put Tangled Web, which I was reading for the Montgomery Challenge, in that spot instead. So I did a little bit of shifting around, as often happens. And then for the Christian autobiography, still working on it. And then The Stubborn Character, I intended to read The House of Hawthorne, which was a library book, but I did not get to it before I had to return it to the library. In fact, it was over there, so I did not read that one. For the Montgomery reading challenge, the only thing I got to was the group read, which was A Tangled Web. I really wanted to read Anne of Ingleside, but I did not. And I kind of wanted to pick up Emily of New Moon as well for some of the other prompts. Again, I didn't get to any of those. And that was a little bit part of my reading slump. For Historathon, I had originally had different books for each slot, but I ended up just doubling up a lot because I knew I could see that I was not getting as much reading done in November as I wanted to, and I knew there was no way I could read a different book for each of those prompts. So I did not read Out of the Easy, which would have been historical era exploration. I did not read House of Hawthorne or Elizabeth Mansfield, which would have been historical romances. I did not read Hang a Thousand Trees with Ribbons or Only the Beautiful, which is by Susan Meissner. Those would have gone for social issues or cultural perspectives. Didn't read either of them. And I didn't have anything marked down for Strong Sense of Place. I kind of was going to feel that as I went along, so that's fine. And then House of Hawthorne was a nonfiction hybrid. Didn't get to that. Read Hanging Mary for that instead. And then War and Conflict, I had a book called Mask of Honor, but again, it had to go back to the library, so I didn't get to it. So that's how I did with my TBR. It shifted and looked a little different, but I did accomplish the main goals. As far as my personal goals accomplished for the year, I did do quite a few. So first of all, let's look at my book tracker for the year. I've had to add extra books. And so these dark brown ones that are sprinkled in these two rows here are the books that I read in November, and one more will be added. So I have surpassed my reading goal challenge for 2024 in terms of number of books read, and I'm on like 112 or I don't know, something like that. More than that, I think, but whatever. For authors that I want to read to 0, well, Austen was a reread to 0. So I was able to fill in The Heart for Lady Susan and complete. Did that one. Yay. So happy. I think now my next goal for Jane Austen is going to be reading annotated editions of her books. So if you have recommendations for that, let me know. Although Lucy Maud Montgomery I want to read, I was able to cross off A Tangled Web for that one and add that to the list. For 2024 releases that I wanted to read, I have Across the Ages on there, and I will finish that. So that will be added to that list. For nonfiction reads, this is really amazing because if I had a goal for this year, it was 12 books for nonfiction in 2024, but I have read 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, once I include this one. So that's pretty good for me. And Miracles by C.S. Lewis and David Brainerd's Personal Testimony are the two nonfiction that I read in November. And that's good because one of my goals for 2025 is definitely going to be to read more nonfiction. In November, for the Read Your Shelf Challenge, I was supposed to read a book that intimidates me. And so I read Cormac, McCarthy, which I already mentioned. So I have kept up with Chantel's challenge all year long, and I just have December left. Yay! For the Tea and Ink Society Classics Reading Challenge, I was supposed to read a book recommended by a friend. So that's that. I did add to my 5-star reads. I added Lady Susan and the Scarlet Pimpernel. So I only have 1 star left on the second page of 5-star reads. So I've had a decent amount of 5-star reads this year, and I am very happy about that, of course. So on my list of rereads for the year, I was able to knock off the Scarlet Pimpernel, which was on there. What I have not gotten to is Mixed Signals by Liz Curtis Higgs, or a book by Linda Nichols, or Age of Innocence. And I don't think I'm going to get to any of those three before the end of the year. We'll see, maybe, but I doubt it. And authors' backlists that I want to read, I was able to knock off Bridge to Haven by Francine Rivers. So I have 4 more of her backlist that I need to read. And finally, I have not filled it in yet. So for my 2024 bracket, as far as my favorite book that I read in November, what do you think I'm gonna go with? I would say, and many of you I'm sure will not be surprised by this, I would say Lady Susan, of course, but I think I might go with Scarlet Pimpernel for that one. Mostly because Lady Susan is just so short. I'm like, does it really count? And I did enjoy it very much, but I feel like the Scarlet Pimpernel, yeah, I think so. I'm gonna put the Scarlet Pimpernel on there as my favorite for November. So we'll see what is my favorite in December. So far, the other 2 out of the top 3 are Born of Gilded Mountains and Mansfield Park. And what will be going up against here between November and December is Paradise Lost by John Milton. So we'll see who ends up in that final slot and are my top 3 books for 2024. So that was my reading in November. It turned out to be a pretty good reading month. Not the best I've ever had. Started out really rough, was really rough most of the time, but I managed to pull through and I had some great reading. I really enjoyed the time this last week of November that I was able to just relax a little bit and read more. And yeah, and a side bonus is that I got to accomplish a lot of goals on my list. So that's always nice when that happens. Anyway, how did your November reading go? I'm particularly interested if you participated in the S Lewis Readathon, what your experiences were with that, what you read, how you felt about it, etc. ABC, XYZ, all of those things. Let me know and I will see you next time. Bye.